there are different ways to go about getting your campaign rolling and how you generate money to generate the media to generate the momentum. There's not one right way, but there's obviously a lot of places where you could make mistakes. And so you got to put all that together into a strategy that's going to be effective and then be ready to change that if necessary. So if you're looking at a presidential primary campaign, nomination campaign, right, you're going from state to state to state to state to try to get folks in those states to vote for you at the party primaries. Because our states we don't have all of them, the primaries happening at the same time. That's advantageous, and it lets candidates move right on a predetermined path, and essentially based upon the schedule of elections, primary elections. It lets them schedule where they're going to spend money, where they're going to spend time, and raise money as they go along the process. And that's probably a good thing, given that you got 50 states out there, and you really do want to make a run at most of those states, right? And now, obviously, the states that have the most people in them and the biggest populations, you're going to spend more time and more money in those areas. But you gotta be able to raise it first so that you can then spend it. And then if you're successful with your nomination campaign, right, and you get the party's nomination, then you're going to start kind of over again, but now competing against the candidates from the other parties. See, how many Democratic candidates did we have during the primary season? 12? 14? There are a lot, right? There are a lot of different folks at any one point in the time that were competing against one another. And until the South Carolina primary, Joe Biden was not the favorite to win. Right? I mean, everybody thought he was going to be the favorite coming in to win the Democratic nomination, but until South Carolina, he was badly underperforming, and people were looking at Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders or Kamala Harris or Pete Buttigieg. Any of those were up there at one time or another, right? Because they had done well in a state here or there, and were generating some momentum and raising good money. For Biden, right, he got off to a pretty slow and shaky start in the nomination campaign, and then in South Carolina, he kind of pulled it all together. And actually, what he did that worked in South Carolina is he made a very strong pitch to African Americans and African American women in particular, and they responded and essentially pulled his campaign out of the dumpster for him. The strong response he got from African American women in South Carolina really put a fire under his campaign. And if that hadn't happened, right, we might have a different nomination for the Democratic Party. Now, with Trump, right, running for re-election, he didn't have any competition within his party and didn't have to worry about it. So he was just taking pot shots at all the candidates as they were coming up, because he didn't really have to worry about getting the party's nomination. So he was already kind of focusing haphazardly, right, on all of the different Democratic candidates, not knowing which one was going to be the one to win the nomination. The same thing happens at the state level, right? We have, for senator or house or whatever, we have the same kind of primary campaigns running, and so you're running within your party first. Again, seated candidates that already have won the election, that are in office, generally don't tend to face as much competition in the primaries as they will, obviously, when they get into the general election campaign. There's not a whole lot of incentive to replace a sitting member of Congress within your party if they've already won once. They haven't done anything, just astoundingly stupid. So generally, not that they'll get a free pass. They might have a candidate here or there that decides to run, but they usually don't have very strong competition at the primary level if they're already in the seat. That changes, of course, when you move over from the nomination campaign to the general election campaign. In the U.S., you really need to, especially if you're running for national level office, you really need to be thinking about how much you're willing to put into this, because we don't run short campaigns in the United States. If you look at the presidential campaign, President Trump was sworn in January of 2017, and was it May or June of 17 he did his first reelection campaign rally. I mean, so in a sense, he just took a few months off, right? Part of that's just as being a unique individual, he enjoys campaign rallies. He enjoys having them and being at. So I think a lot of it is part of what we like to do. But it's common practice in the United States for the if you line them up, the primary and general election campaigns, years before, right, you get to the culmination of a general election campaign. So for us, it's a very long process, and for candidates, they have to be prepared to not only stay in it for that long a time, hoping that they win, but they have to be able to finance it and build a strategy for them and work it. And it essentially becomes a process where we're eliminating winners, right? Most other countries are really good that way. Yeah, I am getting a message saying that I'm getting some connection issues. So you may lose my video every now and then. I'll keep trying to kick it back on. You can't hear me though, right? Some. So even the audio is breaking up. Well, what's going on? We'll just we'll keep going and see what we get. Okay, so like I said, this is a long process. A lot of candidates at the presidential level. Kind of works its way out to be an elimination process, but the good parts to it is that you can move into this from a relatively weak position, and an unknown position, and start building some support. But like I said, most other countries move along a little quicker than the U.S. does, right? So as I got here an example, in Great Britain, it takes them about 5 weeks or so. Now it's a different kind of electoral system. They run different kind of a campaigning process, but they can move their country from campaigning to an election in less than a month and a half or so. And we could do it quicker. There's no requirement that we take a long time to do ours, but it is kind of the process that we've worked out, and the one that we manage to understand. And our candidates kind of like it, so we talk to them about it. They enjoy the process in the sense that they get to compete. They can make a name for themselves over a slow roll, and get people to pay attention to them. So again, the main development that's happening here is something that most of us aren't paying attention to during the primary campaigns. But the primaries are, and not just the primaries, but also the couple states have. I'm losing it right now. They don't have a primary; they have a caucus, which is another way of choosing who they're going to support. out of both of these processes, whether you do it like Texas, where we have a primary and we go to the polls and vote, or you have a caucus where people from a precinct show up at one place and all talk amongst each other as a group and figure out what they're going to do. The goal of this is to, especially in a presidential election, to start allocating delegates out of the geographical areas for each of the parties for particular candidates. So, the candidates are coming in and the candidates are speaking to the people at large, and we're going to vote. But those votes, those that we cast, get translated into assignments of delegates within the party to the candidates. And what you're going to have happen at the end of this process is there's going to be one candidate that gets enough delegates to get the nomination of the party. But there are going to be multiple candidates that have substantial support from delegates within multiple states. And they can use that support to help bargain and choose and negotiate and decide who's going to end up with all of the majority of those votes. So the primary process allows candidates to compete for these delegates and then to use those delegates as bargaining. If they're not going to win, they know they're not going to win themselves, or maybe set up a convention debate between themselves and another candidate who has, substantially the same number of delegates, and make a decision happen that way. The parties control how this works. The parties set up their rules about how delegates are assigned, how delegates are won, what those delegates are supposed to do with their support when they get to a state convention or a national convention. So while we as voters are always looking at what our vote is who our vote's gonna pick, you have to be aware that on the back side of this is that our votes are converted over into delegate support at the state level within each party. So, and that stays within that party as it goes to the state convention and the national convention. Texas does an interesting thing where we have our primaries, and then we have a delegate caucus behind the scenes that all of us who vote in a particular party's primary are eligible to go into and participate in. Most of us don't, right? But so we vote in our precinct, and our precinct has a caucus. We could go to that caucus after the election, the primary election, and participate in that caucus in helping pick the delegates that are going to represent the candidate that got the votes in that precinct. So there's this going on and behind the scenes. It's a part of the process that most of us don't see or pay attention to. But those delegates then carry that obligation of who they support from the precinct to the district level, and from the district level to the state convention. And at each one of those, there's another caucus that essentially centralizes the delegates down to fewer delegates carrying more results. And then at the end of it, you get as many national delegates from each party as you have seats in Congress. So for Texas, where we have 38 seats in Congress, 36 in the House and 2 in the Senate. So the Democratic Party is going to have 38 delegates that represent their nomination from their party eventually. And then the same for the Republican. And if the Libertarians and the Green parties get themselves organized well enough, they'll start doing this as well. And so those delegates that the state convention are picked out and waiting, and they're going to be waiting to see what the general election popular vote is. And if Democrats win that, then those delegates are going to go to the Electoral College to represent Texas. If the Democrats win it, they'll send their Democratic slate. If the Republicans win it, they'll send their Republican delegates. So And it's going to be the Electoral College that actually picks the president. They're the ones who are going to actually cast the votes that pick the president. But those delegates are assigned and apportioned based on how the primary works out at the state level, and then what slate of delegates are picked to go to the conventions based on the general election results within the state, right? So your vote matters, but it's, as a representative democracy, we're going to send delegates who are our presidential vote representatives, right, from the states to cast those votes for us. Now, most of us don't pay attention to that whole process or think much about the delegates. We just kind of watch it on TV and know about it. But this is what the primary process is doing, letting us come into the polls, cast our votes, translate that over into delegate support for our candidates. So it's an interesting way to go about things. And of course, the reason we have delegates is to allow them to be to translate what we, the voters, want into a stronger, cohesive message from the party than we, as individual voters, right, would deliver. So this ramps up the importance of the party and the party platform, and it allows the party to play this part of bringing the delegates along and ensuring the candidates meet the ideas and the focus of the political party, because those delegates are part of the political party. So the two kinds of selection processes we have here at the beginning are caucuses and primaries. Like I said, Texas is a primary state, so we vote right in polls to support a candidate, and that's translated over into delegates. The older way of doing it is through caucuses. Caucuses are group meetings of party members, and you get together at your precinct level and you talk about the candidates and you vote in public, right? And so it's the way it used to be, right? Everybody came together, you made your decisions, you recorded it, and you sent it on. What remains of the three-fifths compromise that is still a part of the Electoral College? Nothing. Nothing remains as far as how we count people, which is what the right. Remember, so the three-fifths compromise was when we're trying to figure out how to do representation in the House of Representatives, and how we were going to count slaves as a part of the population of a state. The compromise was that, right, a slave would count 3/5 of a person toward determining what the population of a state is, and that's gone, right? And that's not in there anymore. We still have effects, right? Because part of the second part of the compromise that comes out of that is this: we split the House and the Senate, right? We have the Senate that represents states, whereas the House represents population. And so the decision to have that bicameral legislature was partly tied to the how we dealt with the issues of racism at the time, and how we balanced the powers of small states versus larger states geographically, and then population-wise in the House. So in that sense, there's still some residual effects from it, but as far as counting goes, no impact at all anymore, right? We have the census, and the census goes into the states and it counts the people in the states. If it's done without any political interference, we get, right, as accurate a possible count as we can of all of the people within a state's boundaries that are residents, right? Not necessarily citizens, right, but residents that are living there. And then that count, right, provides the proportion of seats that you're going to get in the House of Representatives. So, right, we apportion the 435 members of the House to the states based upon the proportion of their general population that's determined by the census. Now, if you start playing politics with how we do the census, you might can impact that. Right now, we're not doing that on a 3/5 kind of compromise anymore, but there have been large political debates and going on about who gets counted as a person at the state level. And what that means is that we've had some debates and some politics being played over how we count uh, residents of a state that are not citizens of the United States. Are they and are they here as legal residents or illegal residents? And the census says count people. It doesn't say count legal people. It doesn't say count citizens. It says count people. But how you actually implement a census is going to impact who you end up counting, and that's going to then impact how much uh, a state gets representatives within the House of Representatives. Now, Texas has generally been the benefit of this kind of situation because we're a state that has a growing population. And whether it's growing because we have people moving to Texas from the Northeast or the West Coast or from south of the border, right? Texas is growing as far as population goes. And those states whose populations are shrinking that are going to be detrimentally impacted by that shift in a population. So the last census in 2010, Texas went. I think we got two. I think we got two seats out of that census. I think we went from 34 to 36 in the House. We may get another one after this census, right? So Texas, as a growing state, is going to get more representation in the House of Representatives. Now, of course, in the Senate, every state gets 2 votes regardless of your population. So there's the impact of that is that we have some very, very small states today that weren't there when we made this decision, right? That if you were to look at their population, they're getting a lot of extra oomph in the Senate because they don't have anybody hardly in their state, right? You go to Wyoming, and Wyoming has less than 700,000 people in the state, right? And they get 3 votes in the Electoral College, right? 2 from their senators and 1 from their House member. Now, generally, a House member is right about, if we were to look at it nationwide, somewhere in the neighborhood of 780 to 820,000 people is what you need to get a House member, right? So if you got 1.6 million, you'll get about 2. If you have, right, 4 million people, you'll get 5, right? Texas has 28 to 30 million people, and we get, right, we get 30 some odd, right? That's too many. Too many people, not too many. We have 28.5 million to 30 million people, and we have 36 votes. So yeah, about 800,000. So Wyoming is getting, because they get 2 senators, they got 3 people voting in the Electoral College and 3 people in the Congress as a whole voting from that state, representing less than 750,000 people. That's that is the remnant of all of the compromising we were doing at the beginning, and slavery played a part in that. So these states like Wyoming are getting a lot more representation, bang for their buck, than say California, Texas, or Florida is. So just that's the way it is, right? And we'd have to change the Constitution to change that. So the primary process and the delegate process, the caucus process, like I've already mentioned, moves from state to state to state. At the beginning, most of these are one state at a time. We start off in the Northeast with New Hampshire, and small state makes it real easy for new candidates, unknown candidates, not very wealthy candidates. They go into a small area and do a couple speeches and some meet and greets and start making a little bit of an impact because it's a small arena. They can get there with just a little bit of money and start trying to win their nominations primary. So the benefit on the front end of this is because we go through New Hampshire and Iowa and things like that, small underfunded candidates that have a good message or have good appeal can actually start making an impact early and maybe, right, get some money, get a little momentum, get some media coverage, having a good showing in a small state. Then as we move through the process, more and more states come into the primary process. It starts, right, you have to start ramping up and spending money and traveling a lot. And then the first Tuesday in March, right, is what we call Super Tuesday, and that's because we've got a number of states all hold their primaries on that day. Texas is one of them. And so that one election day, primary election day, and first Tuesday in March is a big bellwether for who's going to probably be successful within their party. You've got California that comes later after Super Tuesday. Florida and Michigan used to come later than that. They've tried to move their primaries closer, right, sooner in the process because, like I said, this state to state to state process kind of works as an elimination process, right? So if you start off and you don't do well early on and you're spending money but not getting results and you're not getting good media coverage, eventually your money's going to dry up, your sport's going to dry up, and you're going to have to just drop out of the campaign probably. And Biden was kind of getting to that point where he was starting to have to consider that before South Carolina, which is earlier in the process. But this slow process from small states at the beginning to bigger states in the middle benefited Bill Clinton when he was running for president. Right, he was governor of Arkansas, and no one knew who Bill Clinton was. It wasn't from around the Arkansas area, right? But he's charismatic. He's a good speaker. He has empathy, right, with people. He can feel your pain, as people would say. And all of those things played real well for him. And he got a couple seconds and a third place result in early primaries. And people start saying, well, who is this person? And hey, look, he's got a good head on his shoulders. He can handle the. And we saw the same thing with Pete Buttigieg this time, right? You don't get a mayor of a mid-sized city making a deep run at being a president on their first time usually, right? I mean, he's out of South Bend, Indiana. That's not right, just a huge place, and yet he did well enough that now he's being used, right, as a spokesperson for Biden, right, and the Democratic Party going through this presidential campaign. And I guarantee that he did well enough. He's being tapped as somebody that's going to be working for the Democratic Party going forward. So you can make a name for yourself in this big long primary process. Now, the fact that it works as an elimination campaign means that those states that come along later in the process, right, in the April, May, June timeframe, they're not getting a shot at all the candidates because a lot of the candidates have started dropping out by then. They didn't generate enough enthusiasm. They didn't generate enough money. They couldn't put it together into a successful momentum building campaign. And so, like I mentioned with Michigan and Florida, some of those states are starting to say, well, maybe we want to move our primaries sooner so that we have a wider slate of candidates to choose from, right, before everybody drops out. So there's some wrangling going on about when we schedule these primaries, which states go when. Now, ideally, it's the state sets the rules, right? State party. Whoops, looks like I lost. Am I there or did I disappear?
Still here.
Okay, I got a red cross on my face there for a minute. I thought I was going away. I had been X'd out. So what was I saying? Yep, I lost my train of thought. Okay, I don't want to, Andrea. Anyway, so the process is one that's being looked at. The states have the authority to move their primaries when they see fit because the federal government gives them through the Constitution the right to control their election. However, the party, like the national parties, are exerting some influence as well on these states, saying, "Hey, don't mess up what we've got going. Right, this has worked," and so they want to be a part of trying to manage that whole campaign process. So it's kind of interesting. So, right, you can see the primary campaign, like the actual voting in the primary campaigns is about a 6 to 7 month process. The run up to the primary campaign can be another 6 month process or more. After the primary campaign, then you have the general election campaign that's kicking off in the middle of the summer and running through November. So it's easy to get 2 years out of this process, 2.5. And so it does, some people criticize it because you don't necessarily get the best candidate all the time. You get the candidate that manages to hang on, the candidate that can has deep enough pockets campaign wise to make it through some bad primary results and still be there like Biden did this time. So that long process, that step-by-step, state-by-state process means that you've got to raise a lot of money and you got to manage that money well. And you've got to do it over a long period of time. Now, that's a difficult process. If you start running out of money, then you're going to have a harder time getting your message out. We've seen candidates that have mismanaged. I say mismanaged in the fact that they didn't either raise enough money or they spent it right early. Not that they did something to mismanage their money, right? But they didn't strategize it well. And then they're relying on free coverage from the news media to try to get their message out. And we've seen a little bit of this with Trump, right? Trump's running low on money in his campaign right now. And he's been doing more public speaking in a sense because that gets him free coverage, free media time. Now he's such a polarizing figure that anytime he's in the public speaking, the media is going to be there, obviously, and they would be for any president, but especially for this one, right? Because you have to be there because you never know what's going to come out of a meeting with him, out of a campaign stop or an interview. But that plays into his hands because that's media time that he doesn't have to raise money for, right? That's free. And if you're sensational and entertaining and like, you're going to get more coverage from the media than if you're not. And so for a candidate that carries the kind of temperament that a Donald Trump does, this is perfect for who he is, right? He can generate more free media coverage than probably anybody ever. And he's needed it lately because he hasn't had the money this time around that he did last time. And part of that is because he hasn't self-funded this campaign near as much as he did his last campaign. So those are some of the criticisms about this long drawn out effect of the primary process prior to the general election process. But it's not all bad, right? First off, the candidates see this as a positive process. It's tough, right? But like I already mentioned, they can come in as an underfunded candidate, do well, build some momentum, build a flow of money coming in, and then be ready to go into the bigger states that cost more money a little later on. So they kind of like that option. They also like the idea that this campaign process that we use, this primary campaign process, and then general election process, makes them go from town to town, state to state, and engage with people to some extent, right? And that's a useful thing that they're out there, right, talking to people, trying to make the news in a local area by saying something that's appropriate and pertinent and gets attention from the media and from the local folks that they're speaking to. So when the candidates tell you they like the shaking hands and kissing babies part, even though it takes months to do it all, then maybe you don't change. Right now, when you talk to the voters, we've got a lot of voter fatigue. Right, from people tell us, I am so tired of watching all this. Right, I feel like I need to because I need to know what they're doing and what they're saying so I can vote appropriately, but I don't want to pay attention to them on the campaign trail for that long. But the candidates tend to like it. It does give us lots of opportunity to interact with our candidates, and I don't see it changing anytime soon. It's getting longer, not shorter, right? So all of this primary or caucus activity leads up to the national party conventions, which are very important, generally speaking, political events, not just for the party or for the candidates, but also for us, the voters, if we're paying attention. Now, we didn't see very good conventions this year, mainly because of the interference from COVID, and so Democrats did a decent job of trying to put something together, and still be safe about it. Republicans, theirs kind of fell apart, to be honest. They couldn't get an agreement between convention hosting cities and what the party wanted to do and what Trump wanted to do, and at the end, it kind of fell apart, and then it was hastily reorganized. So I wouldn't use this year's Republican convention as a good example of what these are for. But generally speaking, right, that national party convention that happens in the middle of the summer before the general election campaign kicks off is a really high energy, well scripted media event to bring attention to all of the different candidates at the national level and some at the state levels from that party, to get, for some, it's a coming out party in the sense that, hey, this is an up and coming person and we want to put the spotlight on them. And later down the road, who knows what they're going to be running for. Obviously, the end point of these national conventions is to do the formal nomination and recognition of the presidential candidate from the party, and then give them a nationwide stage to say, here I am, and here's what I'm working for, and support my party and my plan. And so all of that's going on. But one of the most important things that's happening generally in the background, and that's the party is putting together their platform, right, which is the list of ideas and policies and the directions politically that party sees itself going, right? Their roadmap into the future for their political ideas and their governing ideas. And that's put together by all of these delegates that come from the states, right? We send them to that national convention, and the electoral college delegates, but as well as other party delegates, right, come from the states, and they get together and they sit down and they negotiate and they come up and they say, okay, as a Texas Republican, I stand for this, or as a California Democrat, right, in the Democratic Party, we want this. And they build, right, a party platform that's supposed to represent the party nationwide, from all of these different state delegates coming to that convention. And if you're ever wondering what a party stands for, what their issues are, go look at their party platform. And it'll tell you all that, right? You can go to the Democratic Party main page on the web, and there's a Democratic Party form there for 2020, and it tells you what's important to them. on issues and what problems they're going to try to address and how they think they should do that going forward, and if they're elected to office, how they're going to govern. Right? It's the most important thing that, other than probably the actual candidate for president that comes out of it, it's the most important thing that comes out of a convention, because it sets the tone for what it means to be a Democrat or a Republican going for the next 4 years till they write their next one. Now, this year for the Republicans, I said they had a bit of an issue there because they didn't really get their convention together and they didn't write a new party platform, in the sense that they sat down and worked it all out. And so their platform this year, this election season, is basically the same one they had 4 years ago. And that is an anomaly. I can't think of that ever happening before. So that's not generally something you're going to see out of any of the major parties, right? They're gonna work this convention, but COVID and the timeline and stuff, all that added up to cause them a problem. So right, scripted media event to unveil their official nominee for president. They negotiate, bring out the best points of the party, and they build a party platform. Those are the things that it organizes all of this together. Because when you think about it, especially for a presidential run for office, you've got 50 states with 50 different sets of perspectives about what's important for each, 50 for the Democratic Party in Texas. I mean, for each of the Democratic parties in the states, 50 for each of the Republican parties in each of the states. You've got to unify that somehow and get one message for the party as a whole. And that's what that convention does for them. So it's important, right, for them to get that all together. Once that's over, right, now you've transitioned from the primary campaign to the general election campaign. And here, you're not going state to state. Now, right, as candidate for president, you are running a campaign that's supposed to encompass the whole country as a whole. And this is where we start finding out how well organized as a candidate you and your party are. Right? Remember the 3 M's that I mentioned at the beginning: money, media, and momentum. Well, this is where you can have some of that and make your way from state to state to state and be successful. But once the general election campaign kicks off, you've got to be managing that in all 50 states kind of at the same time. And as a candidate, you've got to be bouncing between all of the states, right, to get your message out at the right time, at the right place. And that's going to have to vary based upon how well your message is being received where that's a challenge. So you don't know where you're going necessarily, a week or two ahead of time, until you're watching the polls and see how people are responding. So what you have to do is you have to build a strong organization around yourself as a candidate. And what I have here on this slide is a list of the major managers within an organization and roles within an organization that a presidential candidate has to find people, right, and put them in these places if they're going to be successful. We don't think about this organization behind the candidate, but right, we really ought to pay attention to it, because especially in a presidential campaign or a governor's campaign, because how well you do this is a direct reflection of how well you're going to probably, right, serve in office, and how focused you're going to be, and if you're going to have a strategy and a plan and all that. So these are a lot of the ideas that they have to get people in place to work this. And so I'm going to go through these real quick. I wanted to give you just a little bit of a blurb about what these are and what they do, and then you can kind of figure out how they fit together. So the first thing that you have as a candidate is you have to find someone that's going to be your campaign manager. That person is actually going to try to stitch together a coherent strategy and message for you as a candidate. Now, you know what your strengths are probably. You know what you want to say. You know how you want to run your campaign. but somebody needs to be organizing all of it for you. And you're going to pick someone that understands you pretty deeply, right? To do this, and someone that understands the process of running an election intimately, right? You've got to pick someone that understands the whole process, and can put all of these parts together for you, right? It's this, they're going to run your project, and and they're going to manage your project for you, which is getting you elected. Campaign managers at the national level. If you start paying attention to who these folks are, there's some kind of name brand star managers out there that make a very, very good living at doing this, because it's a unique talent, and it requires you to do some really high level work. And so you'll and it's a high stress 24/7 kind of job, right? So if you've been paying attention, there's a guy named Brad Parscale, uh, who was filling part of the campaign manager part for Trump. That he was doing mostly internet strategy, but other stuff too. And a few weeks ago, he blazed out. Right, he lost it. He's got a domestic violence case going against him now. He stepped down from the campaign. Um, the police were called to his house. There are allegations that he was acting just off the rails, right, having some kind of mental episode. Um, and there, no small part of that, I'm sure, is the stress and the wear and tear that it has on a person going through these processes, right, as a manager for this. And so he's out, right? He's done. He's basically broke down on the trail, right? And so, and that's a sad thing for him and his family and all that. But there's a lot of stress here, right? These are really high level, powerful positions. These campaign managers, because they're going to be giving the day-to-day direct orders about what the whole campaign organization is doing. Right? That's their job. If the president is your face on this, the campaign manager is your general, right? That's putting it all together. Second thing you got to have are fundraisers, and these are people, not events. The people I'm talking about here are the people that know everybody that has money, that's interested in politics, that can be tapped to generate donations for the campaign. But these are the people that have the contact list for all of the deep pockets in the country, and who to call, and how to approach them, and what message to bring to them to try to get them to donate. You've got to do that, right? You've got to be tapping these folks to try to generate some income. Campaign counsel is your attorneys. Now, I've told you just in passing, right? You're running a campaign in every state, right? And I've told you that every state has the authority to make the rules about their campaign. Well, every state passes laws about how to run a political campaign in their state, and what you have to report, and when you have to report it, and when you have to fill out paperwork and have it submitted by, and how much money. So a campaign counsel's first job is to make sure that they have counsel in every state, so that they understand all the unique rules and laws about running a campaign in each state, and that as a national campaign they can meet those. So this is kind of your overseer of all of the attorneys that are making sure your campaign is staying legal as they run in state to state to state. Right? So if any one of these folks mess up, you could get blocked out of being maybe on the ballot even, and getting even eligible to get votes in a state. So you got to do this right. Obviously, you've got to have media consultants, right, to tell you, yes, this will work, but you've got to do it this way. It'll play this way to the cameras, but this way to the radio. And here's how we need to get a message out over the internet. We got a plan for all of these different communication streams. And so your media consultants are trying to make sure that you are always shown in the best light. It will help you get votes. And having consultants that understand the whole process will make you a more competitive candidate, right? The fact that President Obama had someone who was aware of how internet media worked, and how they could leverage that as a new income stream essentially for their campaign, expanded their ability to be effective and to raise money. And so, I'm not a slam on Obama. I don't think it was probably his idea, right? He was the policy guy. He was the candidate, right? He's thinking about what do I want to say that gets my message out to people. Somebody else said, if we deliver your message through this medium this way, it'll be successful. And he was smart enough to look at that and go, that makes sense. Let's go that way. But somebody else, right, was paying attention to, hey, here's this whole untapped area where we can raise money and deliver a message. And so that changes the political landscape going forward for all candidates because of what he saw then. Underneath that, you start getting campaign staff, and these are the folks that are doing the nitty-gritty work at campaign offices, answering phones, right, putting up posters, going door to door, right. These are the folks that are going to be organizing all of the volunteers at the city level, right? So there's a ton of the campaign staff, and those people have to be organized. So you've got, right, this organization building down from the top, trying to bring people in. You got to have all of those bodies, right, those people that have volunteered, go in the right direction at the right time, saying the same thing. And so campaign staff is organizing all that and sending them out. One part that's overlooked an awful lot is logistics. This is just for me, this is one of the fascinating behind the scenes things that most people don't think about. But a campaign will look real shoddy if they don't have good logistics people. And what I'm talking about here are the people that are taking care of the daily needs of the candidate, the organizational needs, right, the logistical needs of the campaign process, right? Where are all the places you're speaking? What time are you speaking there? How long is it going to take us to get you from point A to point B? And should we do that by bus or plane or car, or somebody's making all those decisions, right? Really mundane things that are critically important, because if you don't get there in time, it looks really bad. Or how long does a campaign attire last while you're on the campaign trail, right? So you get up and let's say you're really working hard as a candidate, and you've got a breakfast meeting at 6:30 or 7 in the morning with one group of people. You've got a 10 o'clock meeting with somebody else where you're speaking. You got your lunchtime address. You're going to have a 3 or 4 o'clock address if you're lucky, if they can line one up. Then you're going to have something that night that runs from 8 to 10. Do you put on a suit at 5:30 in the morning and that's the same suit you're wearing, right, at 10 o'clock that night or 11 o'clock that night when you're done? Are you going to look, right, polished and put together? And if not, how are you going to manage that message, right? There's somebody sitting there saying, okay, we're gonna have this suit available. You're gonna wear it from here to here. We're gonna change you out into a new suit after lunch. That'll get you through the rest of the day. We'll be rotating and getting clean suits, right? Suits pressed and cleaned and ready for you, so that when the next day you got something, or 2 days down the road. And has anybody made sure that the candidate's eaten today? When's the last time they had a few minutes to run to the restroom? That's the logistics people. They're looking after that nitty gritty stuff that you as a candidate, right? If you're having to think about that stuff and plan all that out as you go through your day, you're not on point. Right? So you've got people that are looking at this all of the time, right? That are trying to make sure that as you go through 2 or 3 different cities in a day, you've got everything you need to seamlessly be able to get up and perform, right, and deliver, and not have to think about this kind of stuff. Research staff, policy advisors, critical to a campaign. Most people, candidates, right, when they're thinking about running for office, there are 6, 8, 10 things that are motivating them, policy issues that are theirs, that this is what I believe about this, and I'm going to run on this, and I think this is really, really important, and it's part of who I am. But you're going to have right, a repertoire of positions that you can reference that belong to you, that you've adopted, about issues you maybe didn't think about or weren't that important to you, but are important to some people. And it has to be, right, a set of policy ideas that are cohesive, that make sense, that don't contradict one another. So you have a group of people whose their job is to take your core beliefs and work them through all of the issues that they see that are upcoming, and make sure that they bring that to you and your campaign manager, and it works for you, and you can be on board with it, and then works with you to, right, get that idea in there, so that when somebody throws you a question that you haven't talked about and probably weren't necessarily expecting, at some point in the near past, you've covered that with your policy advisors, your research folk, and you go, oh, well, yeah, I can speak to that, right? I'm maybe not real fresh on it because it's been a few weeks since I've thought about it, but I've got a place to go. I've got a general idea of what I think about that. I'm not having to make something off the spot. And I know that if I can keep that general idea in my head, it'll be cohesive with my other big ideas, and I won't be, right, misstepping the public that way. So a small group, 3, 4 people behind the scenes, right, are making sure that there's a cohesive message across a bunch of these issues. The other thing they're doing is constantly reevaluating and generating new policy issues for you, or responses for you, because things happen. Current events happen during the campaign trail, and you're going to come off the stage or onto a stage, and a media personnel is going to ask you something. So this just happened. As a prospective nominee for president, how would you deal with this? You may not know that just happened, but your research staff and your policy advisors are paying attention, and they go, oh, this just happened. We need to whisper to our candidate, hey, be prepared. Here's what just happened. Here's what bullet points of how you need to kind of address this in broad general strokes. But you can deliver and look like you're up on what's going on. And good candidates will have those people behind them feeding that to them. And what they'll be feeding them will be information that already corresponds and works well with what the candidate believes. So the candidate has to trust them, right, to bring those new ideas in and make sure that they fit in cohesively with their whole perspective. We talked about political opinion polling. So campaigns rely upon a continual flow of polling numbers to tell them how they're doing and what they need to tweak or what they need to overhaul. So you've got to have pollsters on staff that are, one, working their own polls, but 2, also making sure that all the independent polls that are being done out there are right, being responded to and are being paid attention to. So you got to know how well your message is trending. You got to know if it's hitting the right key metrics and people are paying attention to it or not. And so you've got to have some pollsters there to pay attention to things. Press secretary, you've got to have somebody that can represent you when you can't be in front of the press. So this is somebody that speaks for you. Obviously, going forward, if you get lucky enough to be elected president, you'll have a press secretary, probably someone initially that was on the campaign trail with you. But this is a person that you trust to speak with your voice when you're not there, right? To represent you and your message when you're in the plane or asleep or something else and can't respond to something that's happening. You've got to have that person. The last thing you want today in the environment we have is a period of time where you're incommunicado as a candidate, right? So you got to have somebody that can speak for your campaign. And the last one that I've added here is someone to manage your web presence, right? A web administrator, a communication, somebody working under the communications group. the media consultants that actually understands how all of it works, and can make sure that you have a message that's out there that people can get to, that hits all of the different types of media and is appropriate for the media that it's going out for. I gave it a web administrator title, but this is going to be more than just websites, right? We're talking Twitter, and we're talking, Snapchat, or we're talking Instagram, and right, any way that you're going to get a message out there, right? You have to have somebody that's on the technical side of things that can put that together and maintain it, because you don't want to be looking out of the loop on this, right? So all of this stuff, all of these folks, right, high level folks, some of them staff level folks, all of this is going on in the background. So you've got to, if we pay attention to the background organization of a candidate running for office, we can learn an awful lot about how well they're going to operate if they get elected. Right? If this whole organization is a well-tuned machine, then they've got pretty good leadership skills, right? They've got it all these people going the same direction with the same message, getting things done on time. That's a good indication that this person's got some leadership skills and management skills. If you don't see a well-run organization behind them, and you see a lot of things that are kind of missing or falling down or don't look like they're well organized, then that's a reflection on the candidate as well. And so it gives us another place as voters to kind of evaluate these candidates. But for the candidates, if they're not doing this well, they're going to fall down at some point in the process and not do as well as they ought to. All of this, right, is to get these 3 M's that I've mentioned going, right? All of this organization, all of this messaging requires money, right? You've got to raise money from the beginning of the process to the end of the process, right? We've got literally $1 billion being spent by candidates for the presidency during a campaign process. Millions and millions of dollars being spent on Senate seats, U.S. Senate seats. So it's right. It's huge, right? The amount of money we're talking is massive, that goes through the political process. While everybody agrees it's probably way more than it needs to be, there's too much emphasis put on money. It's the system we have right now. And the system we have runs on cash flow. And it's hard to overestimate its importance, because you run out of money, you run out of coverage, right, to a large extent. And you run out of the ability to control your message if you run out of money. So you got to have the money. You've got to have money coming in. You got to figure out ways to generate that money. Because it's such a big part of it, right, we've got federal laws that come into play that try to manage how the money, where the money comes from, keep up with it, follow where it goes to, put some kind of limitations and constraints on the way the money comes into the process. So, since the early 70s, mid 70s, we've had Federal Election Campaign Act that gives us a broad-based perspective of how candidates have to keep us informed about the money process, right? So there are campaign finance laws in place that tell us, here's how you can raise money, here's how people can donate money, here's how you can spend money, here's the reporting requirements of that money so that we know where it's coming from and how it's being spent. It also provided, and so those are out there, and candidates have to follow that. If they don't, right, we really don't see them get into too much personal trouble for this, but it's if their campaigns can be fined, they can have to pay those fines. It obviously is a huge detrimental impact on your campaign for it to come out and be people saying, hey, they're raising this money or spending this money wrong or reporting this money wrong. They can't figure out what the rules are and follow them. That's a bad indicator for your campaign organized and running well. So you've got to pay attention to this. I don't know that we usually see it go so far as there being criminal liability, any kind of thing like jail time or something for this. Most of it's going to center around fines toward the campaign. The other thing that provided is some public financing for presidential campaigns. If you want to spend public monies on your campaigns, then there are limits that come into play. There are reporting requirements that come into play. And so that puts a little bit of constraint on the process. Most candidates these days turn down public financing for their campaigns because they can raise a lot more money and they can spend a lot more money if they don't opt into it. But it was a way of trying to ensure that there was money available for a lot of candidates, right? To have this public funding out there. The limits that we see on campaign contributions, those are fluid. They change year by year, election campaign by election campaign. But there are limits of how much money an individual can donate to a candidate. There are limits to how much interest groups can donate to a candidate, right? And so those try to serve as a way to limit the big dollars coming in and making candidates kind of perform for those big dollars. However, those campaign contribution limits have been rising over time, and through the use of political action committees, especially ones that are deemed educational political action committees, unlimited amounts of money are allowed to be spent on education during the campaign season. And so really what's going on there is organizations that support a candidate, interest groups especially, and huge, rich individuals create political action committees to funnel money into supporting campaigns. It's not money that generally goes directly into the campaign coffers of the candidate. Because those are limited, those direct contributions are limited. Instead, it's money that the political action committee spends on behalf of a candidate's preferred issues. So if one candidate is arguing for X on an issue, another candidate's arguing for Y, and I'm a multi-billionaire that wants to try to make an impact, and my candidate's arguing X, I can spend unlimited amounts of money educating the public about why X is good and why Y is bad. Because I'm not donating it to the campaign, I'm not directly supporting the campaign, I'm educating about the issue, and that's a free speech right under Citizens United now. Corporations, political action committees can spend unlimited amounts of money educating about political issues. Now, for us voters, of course, we know which side of the issue candidates stand on, and so those education campaigns effectively serve as support or attacks against a particular candidate. But they're legal, right? So you see here on this slide, I've got the impacts of the Federal Election Campaign Act from '74, right? It's tried to shine a light on campaign financing, tried to make it more open to us. Whether it's made it more honest is debatable, but the reporting requirements at least allow us to look at that information, at least have some idea of what's going on financially behind the scenes. The other thing is that the limitations has made it so that if you're wanting to get direct donations to your campaign, you've got to get out there and appeal to more people because, right, you can only donate once up to the term limits, finance limits, as an individual. So the idea was that putting limits on how much a super rich person could donate to one candidate directly would encourage more people to be involved. And that's true, by the way. It's worked out that way. If you look and all of this information is public, right? All the donations made to candidates, but that information is turned in, and the government's comparing how much is spent to how much is turned in, and they have to have good information that shows how that works. But you can go out there and download a list of all of the donors for a candidate, and you'll get a name and a city and a state and how much they donate. And so that's all out there, right? In those records. So it opens it up to some auditing that tries to keep the process at least above board. Any questions about that? So these groups that I've mentioned, these PACs, political action committees, most of them are part of interest groups, right? We talked about when we talk about interest groups, we're talking about those groups that are out there chasing a particular idea, a policy issue that they want government to act on. And so they're raising money from their members and they're spending money to try to get what they want out of government. Right. Most of the time they're trying to get into the halls of government and talk to people and get them to work over an issue. But political action committees are this offshoot of an interest group that focuses on, right, generating money, delivering money, making campaign contributions, and then making contributions for issue education, right? So these political action committees are out there playing a real important part of bringing money into the system and spending it on candidates and on issues. Like I said, just like individuals, they're limited to the amount of money they can give directly to a candidate. It's usually about $5,000 that they can say, here's money from us, go win your election. But they can spend as much money as they want, an unlimited amount of money, talking about the political issues, because that's their right as an organization, as a group of individuals. That's their free speech rights to spend their money to generate expression. So that's the money side of it, right? What do we got here? I'm done. I'm sorry. I should stop. We'll pick up with media next week, right? And talk how that's fitting here to the campaign process a little more.